Howdy folks, good afternoon. Today is Tuesday, September 21st, 2021. And once again, I'm over by Stump Pass, but this time I want to dedicate it a bit differently. Because this time, I don't want to just talk about the ocean. Instead, I want to talk about some other features that you can find at Stump Pass while you're here. So, without further ado, let's delve in to the topic of estuaries. So here we go. But before I jump into estuaries, I want to show you guys some fellow homies that I found while I was walking along the waters. You see these guys right down here? So like this one, that one, and some of these that are crawling along the sand here. You may be wondering what those are. Well, Jeezy Pete. Gotta wait for the waves to pass through. You know, people in their jet skis, they sure love them, don't they? So back on the subject of the Ragged Sea Hare, that's the name, that's what they're called. They basically are they're classified as a mollusk, which essentially means they're in relation to sea slugs or even snails as well. But what's actually fascinating about this fellow homie is earlier in their life, when they are larvae and even juveniles, they will actually bear a shell. But then once they reach into their adulthood, they no longer require a shell. And so you'll just see their exposed body. But yes, they are essentially a type of sea slug that is very well known in the state of Florida. I mean, just look at this. You see, like, all of those dots here? Those are all ragged sea hares. I mean, depending on the quality of the water, of course, you can probably see at least, I think I read that it was up to 600 per square inch. Something like that. I'll be sure to clarify. But you can see that they oftentimes appear in colonies most of the time. And what's fascinating too is their eggs. They're actually produced in these bundles that kind of look like spaghetti strands. So it's actually really cool, by the way. But they do spend most of their life in an estuary. So they can't survive in the ocean, which is not too far. It's just across this barrier island. But yeah, they're called Ragged Sea Hare because I want to avoid pulling it out, but when you look along its back, it just looks very hairy. Kind of like me. So that's why they're given that name. Whoa! I just saw a snook. Oh my goodness. That was cool. I'll get on that subject in a moment. But back on the subject of estuaries. What are estuaries? Does anyone know? Give you a second to maybe think about it. If some of you thought that it's perhaps a body of water, well, yes, you'd be on the right track. But it's not just a body of water. Estuaries are described as a nursery in terms of habitat. Now, estuaries are oftentimes a mixture of fresh and salt water, thus creating brackish water. However, though, please keep in mind that not all estuaries have brackish waters. Some of them, even if you go up to, say, the Great Lakes, those are completely fresh water. Now, what's fascinating is in terms of geologic development, there are 4 separate types of estuaries. So, where we are, for instance, we're kind of at like a sand spit estuary. So what that basically means is, so we have the barrier island to my left, but then once you get to the other side of the barrier island, you'll see the ocean. But then on my side that I'm standing on, we have the estuary, the Lemon Bay Estuary to be specific. But this body of water exists because of this barrier island. If it were not for the barrier island, the integrity of the estuary would be at risk, as given the fact that there's also some fresh water too. Because if it were complete salt water, some of the homies and even the plants that are a bit less salt tolerant would not survive. So that's one type of estuary. Another type is, it's called a tectonic estuary. So those are typically formed by tectonic plates. Now, oftentimes, you won't really see tectonic estuaries in this part of the United States, but if you go perhaps to the state of California, for example, right? A state well known for its tectonic activity, you'll see more of those types of estuaries there. But they are specifically formed by those changes in the rock morphology, or should I say the bedrock morphology. Okay, so then the third type is described as, it's called a coastal plain estuary. Now, coastal plain estuary is actually quite simple. So, a great example of a coastal plain estuary would be, say, if you're up at the Mississippi River, you know, like where the delta is located. So basically, if there's any changes in sea level, there will be some brackish water there that will dominate. But obviously those levels fluctuate depending on how much the sea level rises or falls. But typically with a coastal plain estuary, you'll really see the common features of a delta, which is typically where the river will meet up with an ocean. Okay? Now, last but not least, I believe that the fourth one is called a fjord estuary. Now, you won't really see those in this part of the world. You'll see those more towards Europe, for instance. But fjords basically describe a landscape where water meets directly with rock. So, a famous area for fjords might be Alaska, or even the country of Iceland. Both places in which I have had the pleasure of visiting. So, I have an idea. I'm actually going to wrap up this video as sort of the introduction to estuaries, but I want to make a second video that goes a bit more in depth with what really makes up an estuary and why it's so important both environmentally and economically. So, check out my second video from today, and hope you guys learned something of value from this one. And once again, Journey on a Journey is outwards. Take care, folks. See ya.